Well, to make a long story short, eventually the Tennessee Department of Roads came in there and decided they were going to widen the roads. Well, in a way, I was kind of prepared for that. I'd already thought in advance of what was going to happen. I knew eventually, by widening the road, that they would have to take out my gas pumps. But in the same token, I'd already thought, well, I have enough property behind me that we can rebuild. Well, I wasn't allowed to rebuild. What happened was the state came in and surveyed and said, we don't need to take your entire business. All we need to do is take out your gas pumps. So they took out my gas pumps and then left me in business with what I had left. I didn't survive long. After a few months, it only was 3 or 4 months' time, I started realizing how much money I was losing. My accountants were coming to me and telling me, Steve, you're going to lose $3,000 next month. You're going to lose $4,000 the month after. There's no way that you can survive without not having the gas revenue that you had coming into your business. After about 3, 4 months' time, I didn't know what to do. It really started getting to me. And I ended up having a nervous breakdown. I ended up being in Vanderbilt Hospital for 3 weeks, or over 3 weeks, in the psychiatry ward. I was given all type of psychotic medications. After I was released from the hospital, I went back home and I continued on these medications. At that point in time also, my wife had decided to leave me. I guess she didn't feel like that I could financially take care of her anymore. But I tried my best to try to make things work for us, but it just did not work out. So the first time, before I tried to commit my first suicide, this is how far out of my mind I was by being on the psychotic medications. We were forced to sell our house, our farm, our animals. We had to sell everything. Well, I overdosed with a bottle of whiskey and pills on my first attempt. I was back in the hospital. Again, they kept feeding me drugs. After the house was sold, and my wife made me sell it at auction, so you can imagine the devaluation that we got for our house. What we got wasn't hardly enough to even support us for a year. I moved on and found a place to rent. And while I was there at that place, being on these psychotic medications and that, for some reason I was out of my mind one day, and I was sitting on my porch, I pulled out my pocket knife, and I didn't know whether I was dreaming or whether it was real. So I started taking that knife, and I started making slashes into my arm. I did not feel anything. And I didn't think it was real. Even though I could see the blood dripping off my arm. I didn't think it was real because I didn't feel it. Well, I ended up calling the hospital because after I did realize it was real, I realized I needed stitches to sew up the gaps in my arm. Again, I ended up being in the hospital in a psychiatric ward. Again, after a few weeks, I was released and again placed back on these psychotic medications. The third time, I tried the whiskey and I tried the pills again. This time, I took more. I drank a whole fifth. I took a whole bottle. Somehow, I was on the phone with a crisis center or somebody from the hospital. I don't remember. The next thing I remember, I was back in the hospital. I stayed on these medications. I've been going through this breakdown for 14 years. Back in January 2014, my daughter came to my house. She knew I was a wreck. She knew I'd been passing out. She saw my face was all cut up. My nose was busted. She immediately took me to the emergency room. And when we went to the emergency room, they did not wait. They took me right in. They put me in a wheelchair and they wheeled me in there and started working on me. Doing all type of tests. They figured out that my blood pressure had risen so high because of all these medications. That was the cause of me passing out. I even passed out on the road that's in front of this church. And it was at night. And when I came to, I saw headlights coming at me while I was laying in the middle of the road. I should have been run over. But I couldn't get to my feet, but I was able to roll over enough to be able to get off the road. The car saw me, slammed on their brakes. They came to me and wanted to know, are you okay? I was able to get to my feet, and I told them, yes, I was fine. I just tripped and fell. I'll be fine. Y'all go on your way. Okay, from January, after I come back out of the hospital, they had taken me off a lot of those psychotic medications. But then, for 4 months, I was not able to sleep. And if you've ever gone through sleep deprivation, just even for 2 or 3 days, you know how bad that can be. I went without sleep for 4 months. 4 months I would lay in bed and look at the ceiling with my eyes wide open. Just praying to God, please let me rest. After 4 months, and in April, I decided to end it all this time. I had a couple guns at the house, but I'd given my daughter one of the bigger guns that I owned. I didn't want to take a chance on using one of the small guns because I thought maybe I would just end up making myself an invalid, not entirely taking myself out. So I went to my daughter's house. And I begged her to give me that gun back. I know she didn't want to. She begged me not to do anything, Daddy. But I got the gun. But realized they did not give me the bullets. I said, I need the bullets. So her husband went and gave me the bullets. I went home that night. I loaded that gun up with those bullets. I was ready to go. I was tired. I had not slept for months. I put the gun to my head, like this. And as I started to pull the trigger, a flash came into my head. And what I saw was me in hell, with fire all around me. And then I felt the pain of that fire. I felt the burning. And if you've ever been burned, you know how it feels. It's not a good feeling. I released the trigger. I laid the gun down. And I said, Lord, I do not want to go to hell forever. I know I've prayed that you would forgive me for taking my life. But this vision you gave me told me that this is not where I want to spend my eternity. And I knew right then at that moment that it would be better not to sleep, to live with that, than to go to hell and burn in hell for eternity. God was gracious enough to show me that. That morning I went to my telephone and I called the hospital. I told them that I was wanting to take my life. They asked me to come in. They wanted to talk to me. I proceeded to go ahead and go into the hospital here. And then after I got checked in and they took all my belongings, they took everything out of my pockets, they took my belt,